I think all EV sales should be at this stage, and it's a two-way street too. So when I sit in this position between the manufacturer and the customer, I give my opinion and what I've learned from the experience of what my other customers have had, from certain vehicles and brands and deployments. But I also get feedback from the customer who have deployed those, and those go right back to the manufacturer to create a better product for them.
Whether you're going to market through dealers, distributors, or some other partner channel, the mediated sale is complex. We call it B2B to X.
But the leaders in the industry are the ones who are making it look simple. I'm John Goff.
And I'm Kyler Mason, and this is Why You Win, presented by Element 3.
In today's episode, we talked to Ben Hartford, the electric vehicle sales manager at Pritchard EV. And Ben is a believer, not just in EV, but in what they can do for all of us in the future. We also talked about how they're an important player in the buying process, and he outlined the criteria that they are using to choose manufacturers to put in front of their potential customers. It's a great conversation. We hope you enjoy it. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate having you. We've been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, guys.
To get started, can you kind of just give us an intro to where you are now and tell us a little bit about your role?
Yeah, sure. So Ben Hartford, I'm the electric vehicle sales manager over at Pritchard Commercial, based south of Boston, Massachusetts. And really what my job is to help all of our customers, both advising them and strategizing with them to pave a path for an all-electric fleet. So we're a nationwide dealership, commercial auto group, really. We've been around for over 100 years. And as we look at the next 100 years of existence of the company, we see electrification as an inevitability. So I'm here to make that transition easier for all the fleets out there, both government and commercial, that need to make the switch.
All electric fleet is an awesome way to start this. That's a big bet for sure. Something that we see a lot of enthusiasm for in some segments of the market, and less enthusiasm in other segments. Who's coming along with you on that? Who's excited about that?
I would say there's a lot of commercial fleets in the Fortune 500 size enterprise fleets that have set sustainability goals for themselves, much like we've seen from a regulatory side with states and federal government. Where they put a year, they put a line in the sand, 2030, 2035, we need an X percent, infusion of electric vehicles, or we need to reduce our carbon emissions by X amount by this year. So they're kind of taking that first step and being leaders in the space, saying, we know stuff's not going to work perfectly the first time around. This is still a developing industry and product, but as leaders in the industry, we need to set an example. A lot of fleets come along, but you're right. Like you mentioned, there's a lot more that I would say are kind of tiptoeing around it, not really jumping in head first, and are kind of waiting for really a sign, whether that comes from leadership or from the government, that it's time to actually start doing this. It's not just a fantasy that we're hoping for. It's reality. It's happening globally, and it needs to happen here in the United States.
So, did you step into an open role, or was this a newly created role? Tell us how that came to be.
Yeah, it was a newly created role. I would say, the team at Pritchard's are experts in their field. They're great at gas and diesel sales. But what Pritchard realized is, if we're going to be serious about this, we need someone 100% dedicated to the electric vehicle side. I've heard they had to look for a good amount of time. I've never sold a gas or diesel engine in my life. I never planned on doing it. And so, once we made that connection, I think it was pretty clear to them that I was the right candidate. I, knew the company for a while, and I knew I wanted to work for them and know their prowess in the industry. So took a little bit of looking, but once they found me and I applied for it, we've been pedal to the metal ever since.
Awesome. So for those listening to this, can you kind of paint a picture of Pritchard and the structure and like where your role fits into the kind of the whole scale of things?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the majority of the sales team at Pritchard are national account managers and inside sales reps that focus on both new business to a certain extent, but as well as taking care of a lot of our enterprise customers that order in the thousands from us each year. I work on the business development team, so a little bit different focus where I am bringing in new business, as well as supporting that team as their fleets, which are pretty large, need to make this transition as well. I'm kind of an advisor in that role.
Is it a piece of cake for you to fill up your calendar, or is there some grinding and prospecting and making connections tell us where you are on that spectrum, because I have a feeling of what it might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's about 50-50. Luckily, I've been working in this industry for, I believe, 6 years now. So I kind of know who are the fleets that have an interest in this and who the first call I need to make is. And really, that was my first 6 months at the company, was calling old contacts, old customers, setting up meetings that way. I think as I work more and more, it will turn into more sort of, be more of a grind, because at a certain point that well's going to dry up and I'm going to need to find new business. But I'd say I focus very strategically on certain areas of the country to at least narrow down that list of people I'm prospecting. And really that's where EVs are being sold. So West Coast as well as the Northeast. And as that changes and new EVs come out, new use cases are available, that will expand into the middle of the country, into the Southeast as EV interest, advances.
So in your outreach, like, what does the journey look like in your communications? Are you showing up first as Pritchard, and when are you bringing in one of your partner brands, OEMs that you're carrying? How does that work in your world?
Yeah, I try not to lead with the product. I've worked for manufacturers before, where that's what you had to do, right? You need to sell what you make. I think the benefit of working with Pritchard, I like it so much, is I have, over 13 OEMs with vehicles that we represent, which is around 50 makes and models of EVs. So if I use that approach, right, of, who's going to buy a Ford E-Transit or who's going to buy a Ram ProMaster BEV, it'd be a much more difficult approach, I think. So I always like to start with use case. I find the customers that are either in states where they're being forced to electrify, unfortunately, or, in a commercial company that has ESG reports they publish every year and have set out goals, like I've mentioned before. That way, once I, get in the room with them, I learn much as I can about the vehicles that they currently use, how many miles they're doing a day, how much dwell time do they have in between shifts, what kind of payload they're putting on there, what kind of upfit they're putting on there, how long they keep them. And then we can look into TCO, ROI before I'm bringing in brands, right? So, let's say a gas truck gets X amount of miles per gallon and they drive this many miles a year. Well, this is how much you're spending in fuel. This is how much you're spending in maintenance. Let's compare that to an EV. And at that stage, once I know the fleet makeup and composition, then I can start matching them with the appropriate vehicles. And we'll give them, 2 or 3 or 4 options, because I don't want to, push in any certain direction. I'm more concerned about finding the right solution for their use case than I am trying to sell a particular brand.
Got it.
I like the way you frame that, though. You talk about the ESG, or the environmental, social governance sort of guidance that the organization is giving. You also mentioned a few minutes ago this idea of like a portfolio approach to sustainability that these organizations are taking. And that's really reflective of the way the manufacturers are thinking about it too, right? They've got regulations on top of them that say you have to hit these particular standards. And to do that, they are building, many of them are doing a portfolio approach where they will build ICE engines, or like standard traditional engines, as well as EV. And so it's interesting to see how the market, the customers are buying in that same way, so that they can approach their entire portfolio through that social lens or the environmental lens or whatever internal guidance they have on that. And I think your role is really interesting, as you get to like serve as an advisor on both sides of that. I imagine it takes a lot of your time to probably stay up on all of the evolving regulation there as well, right?
Right. Yeah. It's important to know, what the customer's experience day to day is, and take that, into account when we're building out, fleet assessment, essentially, because we don't want to send them down the wrong path. And I think what a lot of fleets are realizing is not all of this is apples to apples. You're not going to get the same exact electric vehicle look and feel than you would on the gas car that you're used to. So there does need to be a change in fleet management to a certain extent, in operations of how that's run.
Which is one of the things I love about this model, where you get to sit as sort of this, you have OEM partners that you have contracts with and preferences for, obviously, but you get to sit in the middle of this balance between the OEM manufacturer and the buyer, and really be in some ways agnostic, despite the fact that you have these agreements. You get to tell them, here are the angles you need to understand, here's why you might choose this over that. And it, just for me, is just one more example about why this like multiple party sales process is actually a benefit to the end consumer, rather than just like another middleman who's adding cost and complexity.
Yeah, it's a consultative sales approach. I think all EV sales should be at this stage, and it's a two-way street too. So when I sit in this position between the manufacturer and the customer, I give my opinion and what I've learned from the experience, what my other customers have had, from certain vehicles and brands and deployments. But I also get feedback from the customer who have deployed those, and those go right back to the manufacturer to create a better product for them. So it's a positive feedback loop when you do it that way.
Yeah, you become a really valuable source of truth on both sides, for sure.
Earlier, you said unfortunately, when you were describing states where they're forcing your customers to make a change. I would have assumed that it's a good thing for you, but why do you say unfortunately?
I think my opinion's changed on that over time. Personally, I agree with it, but sitting down with customers and seeing the stresses that it's put on them in their day-to-day lives and their positions I feel for them, right? And I think a lot of that has created a pushback for adoption for a lot of people that are looking at doing this to have an open mind about it, but don't appreciate the government telling them what they can and cannot buy.
Right. How much market making are you doing? Are you often working to convert a mindset in the sales process, or are you usually engaging with a buyer that understands the value of EV? What does that environment look like for you?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of both. At first contact, I'm trying to get in touch with the person that, I'd call a champion at that company. They may not be the CEO or someone with a C in front of their title, but they know how the company works. They're respected internally, and they have an interest in electrification. And really, the winning over the hearts of it is done up. So using that champion at the company to convince the people above them that this is a good, decision financially and sustainability wise. But once again, I'm sure as the team gets bigger and we get more out there as Pritchard's with electrification, that it will be more of an education piece that we're going to need to provide. Because I think a lot of the pushback is from misinformation in the industry, pushed on different mediums. But people think that it's a big, scary boogeyman, EVs. And, when I look at it, I get excited. I see the future. And I want them to see the same vision I have.
Tell us more.
Yeah, well, I think electric vehicles have been around, right, for almost as long, if not longer. I would have to check that. And internal combustion engines. And when I look at an internal combustion engine, no offense to any of the great brands that I represent, but it's almost caveman, it's archaic technology, right? You see what's going on in other industries with AI and in data centers and just global politics. We're moving into the future, and electrification just makes sense in that respect. You're sitting in a gas car, you can smell the emissions, you can hear the machine at work. Ryan Pritchard, one of the fifth generation of our company, says it well. It's, he looks at EVs, it almost feels organic when you're driving them. There's something that brings more life about it, right? And we're more in tune with it as humans. So, I hope to see a future with not only electric vehicles, with autonomy, with less congestion, with less air pollution, with less accidents. This is all going down that same path, and EVs is an important part of it.
What do you say to customers that I'm sure you have to deal with these kinds of objections all the time. So I want to hear the pitch. What do you say to the customer who says, yeah, that might be nice when you're sitting in the car and your personal experience changes a lot, but in the entire ecosystem of the platform, buying an electric car isn't actually better for the environment. The battery, the componentry, where the electricity comes from.
Yeah.
Let's hear it,
Yeah. I get that every day. And, you just kind of named a few different misinformation facts, we'll call them, in air quotes, that come across. So I would have to dig into each one of those separately, right? So let's just take that it's not actually better from the environment. People will say that, yeah, they have no point source emissions, right? There's nothing coming out of the tailpipe. Where are you getting your energy from? And I think that's a good question. But there's statistics out there, right? We can look this up pretty quickly. Even if you're charging a electric vehicle 100% off a coal-powered grid, it's still 33% cleaner for the environment than a gas counterpart. So doing that, just going one by one, saying, hold on, you just said a lot of things. Let's go A, B, C, and let me try to explain it the way I see it. It doesn't work. We just tell people what's right and wrong. You really have to dig into why they think that way, and then kind of just, dismantle their beliefs and then rebuild it into, reality.
Yeah. I think that's a great approach. We were watching an economist from the NTEA last week talk about projections into the future about energy demand and where that's going to come from. and how over the course of the next 10 or 15 years, so much, at least in the United States, is going to shift into solar. And I think that's a really key part of that answer. Well, yeah, today that may be true. Yeah, you still have to burn coal to get this electricity, but we're not many years away from a pretty core shift in where some of that energy is going to come from. Again, this is me repeating something that I learned very recently. So I have this much information to share about that, but that's what I'm thinking about.
You're right. You can't look at it in a vacuum. You can't just assume that just because things are the way they are today doesn't mean they're going to be not going to be different in 5 years. Technology advances, an exponential curve, not a linear one. That question on the grid, right? We're putting more renewable energy into our infrastructure to fix that problem. With range anxiety, for example, that's probably number one reason people don't get EVs is I can't go as far as I need to. Well, battery technology is going to advance so far in the next 5 years that's going to blow our minds. So you already see some EV alternatives on the road that can go farther on a charge than a gas alternative could on a full tank. And so once you start to see that, it's not only a one-for-one comparison, it's, I can do much better every day performance-wise in this EV than I can gas. That's when I think you'll start to see people shift a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about bets, about in terms of strategy, where are you going and what are you going to make a bet on that you can't see the real outcome of today? And it feels like what we're hearing more and more, and we've had guests on the podcast come on and talk about hybrid engines and how that's going to extend the range, to your point. It seems like there's a tipping point though, right? It's like some early adopters are already there. Well, we may be a little bit further on in the curve than that. But I think that there's a really good argument to be made by a lot of more conservative, large organizations that are going to say, yeah, I'm really excited about all the stuff that you're saying and seeing, and I can see that future too. I'd rather wait 3 or 4 more years until that hybrid range extends, or until I can get past the 2B sort of classification that like does everything I need to do, or last mile deliver, however much they are going to like lean in or be willing to participate up to this point in electrification. I think it's really incumbent on the industry, on dealers, on OEMs, on everybody to find as many of these early adopters as they can to get that sort of groundswell and an ecosystem of belief, so that these late stage adopters or disbelievers are going to be able or willing to come along.
Yeah, I don't like when people try to make perfect be the enemy of good, right? So it's the solution, the best solution may be 5 or 10 years away, but that doesn't mean that you should wait for that to happen. Because in that time you're waiting, if, for example, you're running a gas or diesel fleet, there's 4 or 5, 10 years more of emissions that you just put out in your efforts to get the best solution, which at the end of the day may have hurt you more.
Is there a business advantage for the fleet to go fully electric now? I mean, that's the goal, right? Why would I do that now instead of baby step into that, or instead of wait 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't tell you to electrify the whole fleet tomorrow unless it made sense for the use case and it financially worked out once we run the models. But I certainly wouldn't tell you to wait. I would say at the very least, you should be taking baby steps and learning from pilots of these things, both charging and with vehicles. So you're better prepared when that solution comes from the lessons you've learned from already trying it. Jump in head first. It's the best way to do it, and you won't leave yourself behind.
Does that mean usually hiring new roles? You talk about lessons learned. I'm wondering what kind of lessons are people picking up?
Yeah, I mean, one could just be the interdepartmental, coordination here. So, before as a fleet manager, you were concerned with your vehicles and how they're upfitted and how they're serviced and supported, so that your operators could get the job done every day. The most you'd have to worry about fuel was a fuel card, making sure that, you're going to the pump and tracking how much fuel you use, and that was reimbursed however the fleet does it. But now with charging, right, you're putting in that fuel pump essentially at the depot, at your locations. So that's a whole nother, variable you never had to worry about before in that role as a fleet manager. Doesn't mean you have to do it all by yourself. So it means you probably have to go across the hall or into another office and talk to the facilities guy, who's the one that's maintaining the facility and talking to the utility providers, and all that goes into managing it, because you guys need to be best friends, because now you need to plug in at work. you need to plug in at the depot and not be sending your drivers to the gas station all the time. So making sure you're both on the same page is going to make that transition easier, because it's going to happen one day. And if we're 10 years down the road and say the state you're in says no more gas sales, you can only buy electric vehicles, and you don't have any charging stations in the ground, you're going to be running in circles trying to figure that out last minute.
One of the things that I'm picking up from this, Ben, if I were listening to this, is your not only like your own personal belief in the thing that you're selling, but also just your dexterity with all of the conflicts and challenges that your customers and these fleet managers are fighting through and fighting with, and internal politics and all this stuff. And I would be really keyed in on like how is my organization set up to help me understand all of the complexities that I'm operating within and fighting through, and do I have all the right kinds of information to really facilitate the change that I'm trying to sell in? Because it's not as easy as just buying a truck. It is really an enterprise level decision.
Right. And I would add, if you're in that position, you're listening to this, you don't have to do it all on your own. You don't have to hire a bunch of new people at your company to figure out this problem. There are plenty of partners in the industry, me being one of them on particularly vehicle and charging side, that is their job every day to help fleets do this. They figured out the incentives, they know the regulations, they know the charging, they know the vehicles. So you don't need to do this, in a silo. You don't need to isolate yourself. The best thing you can do is reach out and ask for help from the experts that you do this every day.
So in your role, kind of stepping back a little bit, what you look back at a year of time, what is the business expecting from you? What would be a fantastic year for you?
A fantastic year for me would be a higher sales volume of electric vehicles for the company. And I would say, assuming this may be a follow-up question, but really looking down the next 5 to 10 years where I see success in my position, and I want to sound crazy for it even internally, but I want to be selling more EVs year over year than we do gas and diesel. And eventually I'd like to get to a point where we're not selling a single gas and diesel truck, and it's all electric, or whatever the solution may be at that time.
Do you have like a healthy competition or banter internally on this topic?
Yeah. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but that's okay. I hope to be in a position in 10 years where I can look at people and say politely, I told you so, and for it to all work out.
Well, what are they saying to you when they're saying you're crazy?
Well, just saying, why would you choose a career doing this, right? You're in sales, gas and diesel sales. It's been an industry for 100 years, and it's much easier to sell a gas and diesel truck. Why would you pigeonhole yourself into this focus? And it just goes back to my personal beliefs. It's what I want to do with my career. It's what I believe in. The planet needs. I think it's better for all humankind to go from a really high level. But I hope at the end of my career I can sit back and say I did something to help the planet and next generation coming after us with putting more EVs on the road and reducing emissions.
Ben's a futurist.
Yep.
I am.
It's very good. So you knew the kind of the world you wanted to work in years ago. Is that right?
Yeah. I had an interesting, how I landed upon it was a little interesting, but yeah, do you want to hear that story?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, of course. He's like, I was building the ice and
This is an auto shop in high school. That's my guess.
Yeah. No, actually, I unfortunately do not work with my hands, but Dad's an engineer. That could have been a good career path for me because I definitely see an interest there. But no, I was pre-med in college for 3 years. So I actually wanted to be a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon. The reason why I wanted to do that, I wanted to do something in my career where I could help people. And so I think around my junior year of college, halfway through, I almost had an epiphany of like, okay, I'm going to have to go to school for X amount more years. And here's the process of becoming a doctor and then a surgeon. And so how old will I be when I can start, bringing in positive income and be out of debt and, live a life? So I quickly made a switch. I said, well, I already have a degree in biology. I can pick up an environmental studies minor with a lot of the same credits. And I see that as, how else can I help people? Well, I can fight climate change. It's the biggest existential threat to humanity, I believe, right now on planet Earth. So if I can do something to help with that, then I can get the same result in a career that I'm looking for. So that pivoted me to picking up that minor. And my first job out of college was working for Tesla, doing electric vehicle sales. This was back in 2018. So Tesla was brand new on the scene. They were just coming out with their Model 3, which is their economy car, their EV for the everyday person. And after that, that catapulted me into the fleet world and working on the vehicles really that are responsible for the most emissions, right? So you and I that drive 20 miles a day, we certainly have emissions we have a burden of emissions on us. But if you're a fleet that's running close to 24/7, running vehicles that have such low fuel economy, 5-6 miles per gallon, you're the one that's contributing the most to that transportation emissions, percentage that we see year over year. And so that's why I landed here, and that's why I do what I do.
That's fantastic. I'm glad we asked. It's awesome to have the belief that you have in the role that you have.
I try my best, yeah. A lot of people are trying to punch you down, but I think from when I started in 2018 to now in 2024, there's been such a shift in adoption and belief for this thing and excitement around it that I'm nothing but optimistic for the next 10 years.
Honestly, Ben, your enthusiasm comes right through, and your excitement is kind of contagious. Like I'm getting pumped up. I'm like, yeah, that is right.
Appreciate it.
Swing some EVs.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it also goes back to the premise of the podcast, and you maybe have nailed it better than we have in our previous episodes. So why do you win? In your case, it's like apparently a lifelong quest to serve humanity. I love it.
Period.
Appreciate it. Yeah, right.
Do my best, guys. Don't worry.
Oh, that's good. Question for you, shifting gears. What's your role, if any, in establishing partnerships with manufacturers?
Yeah, I would say I'm first line of defense. So, Pritchard being a big name in the industry, we get a lot of inquiries from, I'd call them startup OEMs or non-traditional OEMs. They're really the ones in the EV space that are tackling the medium heavy duty problem right now. Our big three, the Ford, GMs, the Stellantis of the world, do a really good job with light duty consumer models and really up to class 2B vans with pickup trucks as well. But fleets can't just only look at that, right? If you're in a state like California, you're being asked to electrify every vehicle you have on the road. So the startup OEMs are filling that space. It's a risky play because we've just seen, look over the past 5 years, a lot of them, I've worked for a couple of them. They'll come out with a really great product, get a lot of excitement and investment around it, and then something goes wrong and the company is no longer in business. So when we get those inquiries, I'm usually the one that would fly out, go and take a tour of their offices, their factory, get to test drive their vehicles, walk under them, ask questions, and then come back and really put a report together for leadership and figure out if this is something we should put our name behind or not.
It's a big deal. You all are like the homecoming queen in this world, and you're very popular. So what's the winning recipe? Like, what are the things you're considering in your first line of defense?
Yeah. So just from getting there, seeing the facilities is one thing. How is this place run? How many people are working there? What kind of investments do they have? What's their strategy? What's their story and their goals? And then actually getting to the physical product part of it, how does this thing perform compared to every other electric vehicle that I've sold or I've driven before? I had to put myself in the shoes of the customer in that respect. It's not just, is this something Ben would like to drive to the grocery store every day? It's, what if I'm an Amazon delivery driver and I have to drive 100 miles a day and make a lot of stops and move packages? So is it easy to get in and out of the vehicle? Is it easy to key on the vehicle? Is the range that it tells me I have on the screen actually the range that I'm getting at the end of the day? How will things like payload affect my range? How will things like climate affect my range? One thing that I really appreciate that Pritchard's does is that we have a whole third-party testing validation process for these startup OEMs. So we'll bring in unbiased third parties, give them a demo, and ask them to put a certain amount of miles on the truck, charge it in different environments, drive it in different climates and environments, so that we have really the best data that we can and to make a decision. And so also that our customers don't need to be the guinea pigs. They don't need to be the first ones to try this out. We have tried it out and we can tell you what to look out for, or we could advise you in a different direction.
So as a marketer, you mentioned what's their story earlier. What is that and why is that important?
I think that will tell you a lot about how that business is run and what their values are. I wouldn't want someone that's just trying to make a quick buck because they see an opportunity with incentives or regulations or whatever it is, and not be paying the attention to things like product quality and customer experience and serviceability. I really want to see a full understanding of the industry and what the customer is going to be asking for and a plan to address each of those so that once it's actually on the road, we're not figuring it out then. A big one is serviceability, I would say. In the fleet world, reliability and the ease to repair to ensure uptime is a big concern for people when they look at electric vehicles, because when the vehicle's not running, then the company's not making money. So it's a much bigger deal than maybe your or I's car has to go to the shop. So I like to see not only a regional plan for making sure that the vehicles stay in operation, but a nationwide and even global one, if that's what the aspirations of that manufacturer are, because we're selling the fleets that don't all have vehicles in one zip code. It's all over the place, and things happen, things go wrong, and we need to prepare for not just assume that it's an EV, it has less parts, it will be easier to fix.
I think that's a really helpful perspective on, again, as marketers, and we're thinking about brand and story, and we think about brands as the lens that you want your customer to understand your business through. If you can hand you some colored sunglasses to put on and say, this is how the world looks when you work with us. But the things that you're looking at through those lenses are still very operational and tactical and very meaningful from the way the business works or the way the vehicle works or their plans to expand or service a particular market. I think that that's really relevant that you in your first 2 or 3 items are listing that like near the top of your list of how are these people understanding and experiencing the market. It comes through in their story first.
Yeah. And I would say the pandemic kind of shook that idea up a little bit, whereas before 2020, you would see a lot of the major fleets falling back on brand loyalty. You'd walk into a meeting and they'd say, we're a Ford fleet, we're a Chevy fleet. With the chip shortage and supply chain shortages and the pandemic, fleets had to make purchases that maybe they weren't typically not sticking to brand loyalty because they still need vehicles that are going to operate. So they'll take whatever they can get. And I think that impression is still left on the fleet industry. So when we look at electrification, it's not, I need a Ford, I need a GM. It's, I need a solution that's going to fix the problem and not give me more.
So you've experienced a shift in the way that your customer is asking you for a solution versus starting with brand?
Absolutely. Yep.
Wow. And you credit some of that or a lot of it to the shakeup during the pandemic?
I think that's something you can point at for a reason why. I'm sure there's more factors that I'm not considering, but absolutely, that's when I first started to notice it, at least in my day-to-day, is, all right, people are starting to open their minds to different types of products here, not just sticking with what we've always done.
Makes sense. So I don't know how to ask this question well, but from your point of view and your strategy with Pritchard, are you looking to form deep relationships with manufacturers and selecting just like a select few, or are you looking to have a wide array of relationships, a large portfolio? Like what is the approach for strategy there and how to best serve your customers?
Yeah, I would say it's strengthening the relationships that we already have with our major manufacturers, the Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, Isuzu, Nissan, but also not closing our eyes to new solutions in the industry. We're not really here to pick winners and losers. We're here to make sure that we can, I'll go back and say again, we're here to make sure we provide a solution for our customer, and our job is to support that solution as long as the customer wants to use it.
The other category of that shift in the business model you were referring to earlier was like, what about facilities maintenance? What about the infrastructure that needs to go into these buildings? And then when it's in there, maintained as well. It may be, this is just me riffing, so tell me if I'm anywhere close. It may be extending up into different parts of the ecosystem or value chain where that service traditionally has just been on the vehicle itself. Maybe it extends in different places. Is that something you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. With charging stations specifically, I think it's an industry-wide focus right now, is making sure that they have even better uptime than the vehicles do. because the last thing you want is to roll up to a charging station and there's not another one in 50 miles and your vehicle won't charge because the station's down. I've seen some concerning figures. I won't quote them because I don't know the absolute, but the amount of service, the amount of DC fast chargers that are down at any given time in this country, I believe, is 1 in 3. And so if you're not using a reliable network like a Tesla supercharger network, you have a 33% chance. I mean, you roll up to that charger, you're not going to be able to charge. And then you got a whole myriad of problems you got to figure out what to do with that vehicle. And so, yeah, making sure that you're thinking more about maintaining those assets as well as your vehicle assets is just as important.
Just curious, what are some of the biggest challenges for you right now? If you could just make a problem or two go away, what would that be?
I would say my biggest challenge is education. I don't think enough people have the right information in front of them about what EVs are, what benefits they can bring, and why they should add them into their fleet or buy them as their personal vehicle. And then another challenge would be infrastructure. I think it's improving rapidly, but it's still at the point where, it will turn someone away from buying a vehicle because they don't think they're going to have somewhere to charge it. And I think that one will probably get fixed before the education piece.
Do you see the education piece as it's everyone's job, or whose job is it?
I think it's all of us that work in the industry and are experts in our space, that we have a burden to get in front of people and teach them what we've learned and give them the real facts and get out. I mean, I don't want to put it on one, right? I would say, and I see it everywhere. I see it in media, I see it on LinkedIn. I see it just in day-to-day conversations at a charger when people see them driving an electric vehicle. But at least, we could point to the people that know what they're doing and know this stuff and say, wait, it should start here. And that's charging companies, that's dealerships, that's manufacturers, that's fleet operators, it's fleet management companies that deal with this stuff.
Love it. Good 10, 20 million people are going to hear this podcast. So that'll do the trick.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Well, there's tons of information out there. YouTube's great, right? But if you go in the wrong direction, but you use multiple sources, and I don't know. I don't think everyone at this point knows someone that drives an electric vehicle. So call them and ask them about their experience, ask them how they charge it, ask them how much money they're saving in maintenance and fuel, and go from there. See if they'll bring it over and let you drive it. That'd be the class.
Oh yeah. What else, John?
I mean, I'll second that. I got to get on a work truck week here last March, and those things are fun to drive. They take a little getting used to in the braking if you're not used to that regenerative braking. But once you get in it, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you can imagine, right? If you're spending 12 hours a day in your car, which if most of us don't, I'd much rather it be electric. And I'm sitting at the stop sign, I'm not shaking because of the engine. I don't smell the fumes. No, it's just a whole better experience. Like I say, it's just more organic at the end of the day than the alternative that we've been used to.
Ben, it sounds like you've sort of known for a while about how you're going to direct your career and direct your life. For those of us who haven't had such a clear vision into the future, if you could give some advice to people just getting started out, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say I kind of figured out what I wanted to do based on my hobbies and interests. So when I didn't just look at the transportation industry and EVs first. It was, all right, how do we address climate change? We need to reduce emissions. You could go into solar, you could go into wind, you could go into trading credits, you can go into all sorts of different industries. But I found myself on the side watching YouTube videos about Teslas a lot because they drove themselves and they were cool. And I've always liked cars my whole life. And so when kind of bulb went off, like, wait a minute, I can have a purpose in my career and achieve the goals that I want to achieve by reducing emissions and helping the planet. And I can do it with products and hardware that when I'm not at work, I'm obsessing over. So I'd say find that thing that you find yourself obsessing over when you're not at work and figure out how to make that into a career.
All right. As a futurist, you've made a bet to go 100% electric on these fleets. Now I'm going to ask you to take one more step and make one more big bet. So if you had to go beyond 100% electric, what's the thing on the horizon that you said, yeah, electric, but also?
I would say hydrogen. It's another alternative fuel. It is facing the challenges that the EV industry was facing 10 years ago. The biggest question is infrastructure. How do we put stations, and even above that, how do we generate hydrogen that's clean, and so that it makes sense from a sustainability standpoint to move into that fuel source. But if I say this to people all the time, so I would say honestly, class 3 and class 4 vehicles, size of vehicles and up, will probably be hydrogen solutions in the next 10 years. The problem we see with EVs, especially in the medium duty size vehicles, is it's a physics equation. The more payload that you're putting on the vehicle, the less range you're getting. And so there's a natural endpoint there if you're trying to electrify where it doesn't make financial sense. I use the class 8 example, right? If you want a class 8 vehicle semi-truck that goes across the country to deliver goods to be all electric, you're going to need to add so many batteries into that thing to have it do the route that what you're actually carrying behind it and making you revenue is not going to make sense financially. So hydrogen gets rid of that problem. Hydrogen doesn't weigh anywhere as close to as much as lithium-ion batteries do. And as you use it, you get less. Your weight goes down like a plane. So I would see that as being the future of a lot of these vehicle segments, and it's a zero emission solution. But there's still a lot of work to be done to figure out how to steward that into existence. But I'd also say there's a lot of all the big companies, everyone that works in this space and creates products here, they're thinking about it too.
So I think that class 3, class 4, think like Amazon delivery truck or like a big box truck or something like that's going around the city. I think that makes a ton of sense. And also, for whatever hesitation people have about hydrogen, what I like about your approach there is that it doesn't have to be binary. It doesn't have to be, okay, we're going to be 100% electric, and therefore we have to figure out how to make every truck ever, every city bus ever, every garbage truck run only on batteries. There are more interesting, diverse approaches to do this.
Just like gas and diesel, they both have different applications where one makes sense over the other. So EVs, will they go away when hydrogen comes around? No. I would think still, as a consumer and light duty stuff up to the class, even like we're talking last mile Amazon delivery, I would still see that as an electric use case. But as soon as you start moving goods long distances and you got to move a lot of weight, that's a hydrogen solution. And they'll coexist, I believe.
We'll wait and see.
Yes, we will. Well, hopefully I'll call you. We'll hop on here in 10 years and I can say I told you so.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Calendar reminder set.
All right, Ben, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on and for sharing your perspective and your background and the bets you're making. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Why You Win is presented by Element 3, a marketing firm focused on modernizing go-to-market strategies for manufacturers that sell through complex distribution channels. We help leaders solve problems across demand generation, sales channel support, and brand development.
If you'd like more from myself or John, connect with us on LinkedIn. And for more from Element 3, visit element3.com. That's elementthree.com.